Will they ever know? Will there be closure for the loved ones of the missing aboard Malaysia Airlines Flight 370? Malaysia's Prime Minister may be certain now that it went down in a remote corner of the Indian Ocean, but bad weather so far curtailing efforts to confirm that satellite imagery of debris indeed comes from the Boeing 777. The mystery complete as the search hones in on some of the world's roughest seas, an area diametrically opposite to Beijing, its scheduled destination. There you see its last known tracking in the Chinese capital this Tuesday. Grief turning to a rare display of public rage in a nation where street demonstrations are banned.
They said that none of them survived. I don't believe that. If you make such a conclusion, you must have some evidence. We want us why.
Of course, for Malaysia, it can feel like unwelcome attention since March 8th, when the plane disappeared. Authorities from a ruling party that's held power continuously for more than half a century have winced in the glare of the spotlight. How will the disappearance of flight MH370 change Malaysia and its relations with the outside world? Well, will it change also the future of aviation safety? We're going to be talking about it with our panel. Today in the France 24 debate, what happened to Flight 370? With us to talk about it, he lost a brother in the 2009 Rio-Paris flight that crashed in the South Atlantic. John CLEMES, many thanks for being with us here on France 24. Former vice chair of the AF447 Support and Solidarity Association. Exactly. Also with us, Antoine, BONDAZ, visiting scholar at the Carnegie Tsinghua Center. I hope I pronounced it correctly. It's quite okay. All right. Pierre DUVAL, chair of the Regulation and Safety Committee at the Aéroclub de France, which is the world's oldest aviation organization. Thank you for being with us. And from Washington, Jim Matthews, executive editor of the Aviation Week Intelligence Network. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. The France 24 debate, where you can join the discussion on Facebook and on Twitter, our hashtag F24debate. It was late Monday, 16 days into the search. On the basis of cross-check satellite evidence, Malaysia's Prime Minister convening the press.
According to this new data, flight MH370 ended in the southern Indian Ocean. Malaysia Airlines have already spoken to the families of the passengers and crew to inform them of this development.
John CLEMES, we heard a short while ago from one of those angry relatives speaking outside the Malaysian embassy in Beijing. This reaction you've seen, what do you make of it?
Well, under the circumstances, I think it's understandable. These people, you have to remember what they've gone through. Initially, they're told that they lost a loved one in the most horrible circumstances possible, in an abrupt, violent, brutal, very public way. Then secondly, there's almost no information about what happened. So they've gone for 3 weeks with being on tenterhooks, trying to find out, did it really happen? And how did it happen? And where did it happen? There's almost no information at all. And then thirdly, they're in a hotel surrounded by the world's press in a real fishbowl under immense pressure. And so I think it's quite normal that they've cracked under the circumstances. The flow of information has been fairly chaotic, and we can go into that more, but the families would be feeling extremely frustrated on top of all the distress and grief that they're already feeling.
And there's talk about whether or not they should be going to Australia, where the search is based from, whether they should be staying in Beijing. What do you think would be is the best thing?
Well, in that kind of a decision, each person or each family is going to make their own minds up. A lot of people at this stage will want to just be by themselves and be with their family and friends and be away from the whole, circus sort of atmosphere. Other people will want to plunge into it. Each person will have to decide that themselves.
Jim Matthews, we talk about the chaotic nature in which information has come out. Are we being a little too unfair?
I think maybe potentially, yes. Any search is going to be, it's going to be subject to what we would call the fog of war. In this case, it was even more complicated. You had 8 political jurisdictions. You had a mysterious disappearance. You had conflicting information. You had governments that weren't necessarily sharing what they knew with each other as the search was unfolding. You had jurisdictions, each of whom probably thought they were in charge of the investigation. So I think potentially we are being a little unfair. All search scenes are chaotic even when they're run by one organization in a smaller area. This was a lot of organizations in a very large area.
At the outset of this, Pierre DUVAL, you came and spoke with us about it. And has the investigation gone the way you thought it would? It's now been, what, 17, 18 days?
I didn't have any real ideas about what was going to happen. The thing is that what was true at the time is that the military had more information that we would think of, and that actually they delivered this information in the chaotic way that you are describing, just because they may not have been in the first place being able to release the right information at the right time at the right person. There's a real communication challenge in this, and I think that Jim is fully right, saying that you have so many organizations, such a pressure from the press, from everybody to get some results, that it's normal that it doesn't go the way we think it should be.
But even now, we've had this announcement from the Malaysian Prime Minister, but we haven't actually positively identified debris, have we?
Not a debris, and I think we have to be quite careful about the result, because when we have some debris and when we are really able to measure up exactly what we have, we can tell the world that, okay, we found something. Right now, we are still at a stage where we have, in theory, this is what happened. The airplane crashed at this position, but it's still in theory. We need, and everybody will need, more proof that it has been the case.
Jim, could it be that this could also be a red herring, this identification of a spot in a remote corner of the Indian Ocean?
You always have to keep all your possibilities open when you're conducting a search, especially one of this scale. But certainly this is probably the best lead that has emerged in the days since the incident began. I mean, the math here is fairly convincing. The technique is pretty well known. It's not esoteric. It's not voodoo. It's pretty well known. And at this point, the main objective was to establish what search planners call the last known point, the LKP. And once you've established that, a real search can begin. The satellite data and the calculations that were used to arrive at that point really finally created a normal search box that the searchers can now go into and begin the search that everyone had hoped they could have begun 2 weeks ago.
Which we'll get back to it shortly. Some have likened to looking for a needle in a haystack. Now, already we heard one reaction today out of Beijing. In the minutes that followed the Prime Minister's announcement on Monday, there were some violent reactions from Chinese relatives of passengers.
They're hiding something from us.
The government is rotten. The Chinese government needs to give us an explanation. We haven't spoken to anyone.
Antoine, BONDAZ, was that a slip of the tongue? She said the Chinese government.
I think this is a slip of the tongue. They are very criticizing, actually, the Malaysian government. But in all the communiques from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they never criticize, actually, directly and openly the Malaysian authorities. Today, actually, there's a spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs called for Malaysia, actually, to release the data and some evidence.
We're going to hear from him in a minute there.
And actually, that's what the relative stayed in your video is like, we want to know why. We want to know what happened, and we want to have evidence to be sure of what happened. And actually, that the idea that so far there is no evidence, and the Chinese government cannot give this evidence. So the relatives are kind of turning to the Malaysian government and criticizing it openly now.
All right, I want your reaction to the diplomatic game of ping pong that we saw this Tuesday. Beijing, as Antoine mentioning, insinuating that Malaysia's prime minister left China in the dark before going public with that statement.
Regarding what we will do next, as of now, the search is still the top priority. We will do our utmost to carry on the search. We urge Malaysia to carry on coordinating the international forces in the search and provide all valuable information and clues to every country in a timely manner so that the search can be more effective and better targeted.
Can be more effective and better targeted. That peak repaid in kind by Malaysia's acting transport minister.
Based on the new analysis,
I remind you that we received satellite data from China involving sightings in the South China Sea, which made us detract ourselves from the search and rescue to search areas which we've already searched, and it was found to be negative.
So who's right in this one, Jim Matthews? Is it the Chinese who are saying, how come you're going public with information that you're holding back from us? Or is it the Malaysians saying, why did you have a satellite that sent us the wrong way?
Well, to be honest, since I'm not there, I couldn't tell you which one is right. I can tell you that when you're conducting a search in a charged atmosphere like this, you can have miscommunication from the planning section to the logistics section, let alone from the search planners to the military, up to the aviation authorities, up to the governments, and then across diplomatic channels. At every step, you have the opportunity for a misstep. So, you know, not being there, not being privy to the offline conversations that have been taking place, I can't really say. I can certainly see, however, a certain amount of reticence probably on all sides because of sort of the traditional tensions in the area. And then you compound that with, as I said earlier, that fog of war where people inside the search may be sharing imperfect information with one another. That only complicates the task of sharing information up the chain, up to the political leadership.
How serious, Antoine BONDAZ, is this verbal jousting?
I think it won't last for long, and it will end up actually as soon as Malaysia, the Malaysian authorities and the Australian authorities are giving some data and evidence. I think it won't affect in the long term or middle term even the bilateral relation with Malaysia, which is like not only composed of that event, be it a tragic event, it's also like a politically, on the political aspect, on the economic aspect, on the military aspect, and I can't believe that it will affect for long the bilateral relation between the two countries.
And this, Pierre DUVAL, brings back to what you were saying about how there is this suspicion, this mutual suspicion, which can hamper an investigation.
I'm not sure it really hampers the investigation. It hampers the communication about this. But actually, the real people working on the field, you know, they just try to find a solution. They would maybe do better if they don't have the kind of pressure that the media and the political world is putting on them. But actually, these people, all of them, are doing a great job. And if Inmarsat released the information maybe a little bit late in other parties' mind, actually, they have been working, I think, very hard in order to secure the kind of information they are delivering. And the way they calculated everything, recalculated, they requested another satellite company to confirm that their own calculation was okay. It's just because actually it just takes time. I know that time is really difficult to handle from the outside, but when we are working on this kind of topic, you need to be able to have a clear view, and for this you need a little bit of time.
John Clemes?
Well, I think it's interesting to look at the Air France investigation. The problem in the 370 is that the Malaysians don't own the process. They had to step up, give everyone confidence that they were competent and they could do the job, and own the process and have everyone come through them. When you think back to the investigation in the search for the Air France 447, the French owned that process. Nobody would have dared go around the French and the Americans or the Brazilians and try to
Even
do a
though
search
it was
on
much
themselves.
closer to Brazil, where the crash site
Absolutely, it was in international water. It was closer to Brazil. It was a French airline, like with Malaysia Airlines. So it's completely credible that the Malaysians should control the process, but they haven't been able to impose themselves. You end up with the Chinese making announcements, the Australians make announcements, the American president's spokesperson makes an announcement. There's absolutely no control, and that's partially because people don't have confidence, I think, in the Malaysians. Maybe they don't have the competence to do it, in the bureaucracy and the administration, but it's sorely missing, and I think the other actors, including the families, don't have confidence in them to do this properly now.
don't have confidence to do it properly after the crash of the Rio-Paris flight. Is that one of the recommendations you made, new guidelines for how to handle for who leads the investigation?
No, I think because it was on that aspect, it was fairly well done in the Air France investigation. So there was a number of recommendations made in other areas, dropping the buoys to measure the currents that have been used here. But no, I think the French and the BEA, we had difficulties with them at times over transparency in certain questions and whether the search was going to go forward. But they controlled the process and they were communicating, as well as they could.
So when you hear those relatives saying they're hiding the truth from us, again, what do you say?
Well, I think, I don't know if that's true. I suspect it isn't, but I understand the sentiment that, there's been bad information given. There's been information that's been badly given. There's been information that's perhaps even been withheld or delayed, and it's been mishandled. So I think it's totally normal that the families are extremely upset.
Right now, the investigation is on a remote part, as we say, of the Indian Ocean. A lot of comments from you, by the way, coming in on Twitter. To be honest, I really do think that the plane didn't crash. Somebody is covering up something. Time will tell. Pierre DUVAL, a lot of people's thinking this.
I read a lot of that stuff in the last days, because it has been almost 3 weeks since the crash, and everybody is looking for other solutions, and it's always the old stuff about somebody's hiding something, is organizing that, and I have a lot of conversations with my friends about that and other experts. The thing is, nobody has other kind of information regarding this flight. If there were some conflicting information, you would be able to say, okay, maybe this is this version or this version, but nobody has anything else than what is given to us. In addition, you have so many people working on this and so much information, as Jim said, about the level of calculation, the expertise which is put in that if something was really wrong, a lot of people will tell about that. So the plane may not have crashed exactly where it is said, but I tend to believe that the things have been going exactly how it is now described.
Which broaches the next question, which we'll ask when we come back. Why did it change course and how? Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.